Cryolipolysis. That is a big, difficult to pronounce scientific term for fat freezing. It's come to my attention that this is one of the new things, the new craze when it comes to weight loss. And I was immediately interested because up until this point, I've heard a lot about fat burning. I've heard a lot about fat blasting. In fact, I've covered them in a number of videos looking at the science behind it, how effective they are. And what I found was that there's not a lot of science to always support these. And then what there is to support, there's not a lot of actual value. You don't gain a lot. When it came to these fat burning supplements, we burnt very little extra fat, so it didn't really matter much in the long run. So I was like, okay, that wasn't effective. Maybe fat freezing is the way to go. At least we're trying something different. So in today's video, I'm going to have a look at cryolipolysis. I'm going to look at what the science says, how it works. I'm going to then do some of my own science, and then I'm going to close with some of my own personal thoughts and opinions on exercising in the cold and what exactly that can mean from a weight loss perspective. So let's dig into it. So CoolSculpting, this is where I started my search. I had a look at their website. There were lots of information here, lots of before and after pictures. Truthfully, looking at some of the pictures, I couldn't quite notice too many differences. So then I was like, okay, this is where I'll start. And I decided to go to the TGA page, the Therapeutical Goods Administration, because that featured prominently in their marketing that they were the only TGA approved fat freezing treatment in Australia. So I went to the TGA, and they have the Australian Register of Therapeutic Goods, and I threw in CoolSculpting, and I found absolutely nothing. I found that was a bit strange. So then I just threw in cryolipolysis, and I found, I think, 30 results. So immediately I'm like, well, they said they were the only one, but it seems to be that there's a lot going on. So I dug through the product information pages just to see if they could shed any more information about how this works, how it goes about doing it, are there any safety risks? And just when we're touching on safety, when I looked at, well, what actually does the purpose of the Australian therapeutic goods, I looked at it, and their primary concern is that it meets standards and that it's safe. There's very little mention about whether it's actually effective. So bear that in mind, that just because it's approved by the TGA, that often means that they've been able to demonstrate that there's very few safety risks, and not necessarily that it's actually going to do what it sets out to do. So then I found the most comprehensive product information page and had a look at that. And I found immediately, when I look at the intended purpose, it says that it's intended for the spot reduction of fat, but that it's not intended for weight loss or the treatment of obesity. And that immediately, to me, I'm like, well, if we're removing layers, the outer layers of our fat, but we're not actually losing any weight, where is it going and what exactly is happening here? So at this point, I decided it was time for me to look into the science of cryolipolysis and how it works. So there wasn't a lot to go on in the science. I found a number of articles and I read through them, and some of my first thoughts was the design of their experiments weren't very scientific, they weren't very controlled. Then I noticed that there were very small sample sizes, so it's hard to be confident in any of the results we have. Then when I was looking at some of the results, they were really quite small. We're talking about less than 10 millimeters of the reduction in that outer layer of fat, and that's really not a lot. When we're talking about 2 millimeters, you're going to need to get some high-tech equipment to really measure that. It's not something that you're going to be able to perceive visually. So I was like, okay, well, let's dig into it. And what I found was that there wasn't even consensus on how it actually works, how the cold treatment is able to just target the fat cells, and then what happens to those fat cells. Some say that they're slowly broken down by the body, which would mean that the fat cell is dying, so the body takes all of the free fatty acids that are stored within that cell, takes that out, and it goes into the bloodstream. And then I'm like, well, if we're not actually using those free fatty acids for energy, then eventually our body's just going to store them in another fat cell. And then I also looked into it that even if we do kill off fat cells, our body can regrow them. So I was like, okay, well, this science, and then most of the study said we recognize that there's not a lot of hard and fast research on this. The evidence is lacking. We recommend future research. So I took it upon myself that I was going to do some of that extra research, and I can't wait to share with you what I discovered. As a scientist and an exercise professional and someone who's just an inquisitive mind, I decided I would be well placed to add to the existing knowledge base on cryolipolysis, and I followed all safety procedures in my experiments. So to start with, I live in Queensland. That means I'm not often exposed to the cold, but I have traveled and I have completed races in the cold. So I know a little bit about hypothermia and frostbite. And frostbite is a cell death that happens when you're exposed to extreme cold and often results in amputation. So I was like, okay, I am going to not start with experimenting on myself. So I decided to start with some knobs of butter. Now I got 2 knobs of butter from the same store. I bought them at the same time. One of them I've been keeping in the fridge as per the instructions, and the other one I have been subjecting to cryolipolysis by treating it in the freezer. Now I've done some before and after measurements. I've also compared the 2 of them, and I can say that there has been no change in the butter after cryolipolysis. I don't quit though, and that was only one experiment. I figured I would keep digging into it, and I thought that maybe something that when we were processing the butter, something messed up the fat, so it's now resistant to the cold and cryolipolysis. So I thought maybe if it's not processed and if it's from an animal, so I went to the butcher and I got 3 really beautiful lamb steaks. They're spring lamb. It's got beautiful marbling in the meat, so it's got some intramuscular fat, but it's also got a nice layer of fat on the outside, a big, thick, I don't know, just a lot of fat on the outside. And I figured that would be a good place to continue my research. So I've been keeping one in the fridge, and the other I have also been subjecting to cryolipolysis. Again, I have inspected them and I've been unable to notice any changes. The fat has not magically disappeared. It has not been destroyed. It is still very much alive and well. So then I was like, well, maybe the organism or the animal or the human has to be alive for this to work. And this is where I started to have to worry about ethical approval. And also, since finding a freezer large enough for myself would have been quite difficult, I decided that I would test it on a live animal. I couldn't get my hands on a lamb, but my neighbor does have a cat, and that is actually such a lie. I did not go that far. What I did do, however, was I started looking up animals that live in cold environments. And I stumbled across the walrus, I stumbled across the seal. And looking at these animals, they do not appear to be lacking in fat. They, in fact, appear to be well equipped. And as someone who considers myself quite intelligent, I know that fat is called blubber, and it is in fact essential for again, the walruses, the seals, and also the whales, and that is because it insulates them. Not only does it provide them energy, but it also stops them from freezing to death. So now I'm starting to think about it. I'm like, well, if cryolipolysis was real, if we could just expose fat to the cold and it would die, then all these animals would die also, because they require on that fat to survive. And seeing as though I can see that these animals exist, I've seen them with my own eyes, then clearly something else is afoot here. So I decided to dig a little bit deeper, and I want to now share with you the actual science between the cold and weight loss. I've heard it said that behind every good lie there is a shred of truth. So all joking aside, the cold does influence our metabolism, but not at all in the way that it's portrayed when you look at the marketing materials for cryolipolysis. So I want to talk briefly about that and then wrap up the video. So if you've watched any of my previous videos, you would have heard me speak about thermogenesis, and that is your body generating heat. And it's in fact the focus of most of the fat burning and the fat blasting compounds and supplements. They increase your body's thermogenesis, so they basically turn up your internal thermostat, if you will, so that your body is spending more energy to maintain that elevated temperature, and that is how they increase your metabolism to burn away all this fat. But when we've looked at that research, it's not a large amount. So when it comes to being exposed to the cold, you just briefly touch on some of the laws of thermodynamics, and that is that heat will travel from a hot body to a cold body. So we are hot bodies. So if we go and stand in the cold, our body will radiate out this heat, and the heat will be leached out into the cold environment, and then we start to get cold. And now our body can only operate within a very narrow range of temperatures. Too far above that, and we get in all sorts of troubles with our proteins starting to denature, and our organs stop working and our cells stop working. The same happens if we go too far below that. So when we take our body and we go into the cold, it starts to increase the rate of thermogenesis. It starts trying to heat itself up. And there's many ways it can do that, but the most common that we would have all experienced is shivering. You go out into the cold, you start to shiver. and that is your body. It's vibrating your muscles, and it's using that kinetic energy to generate heat. And we know that our muscles do need energy to work. So if they're constantly, shivering, even though it's small movements, that is a little bit of extra energy it's using. So yes, there is a little bit of truth that being exposed to the cold will increase your overall energy expenditure, but it's not by a lot, and it's certainly not in the way that the cryolipolysis likes to portray it, which is will expose a small portion of your body to not something super cold for a not very long amount of time, and then that will, magically just strip all this fat off you. That's not how it works. If you were to get something that cold, you would not only kill the fat cells, but you would start to kill the other cells, and you're not triggering this increased thermogenesis to try and warm your body back up. So there we go. That's cryolipolysis. So some of you might be thinking, hey, wait a minute. Rob said he bought 3 lamb chops, but he only used 2 in the science. What happened to the other one? Well, I'm happy to say that it did not receive cryolipolysis. Instead, I've had it marinating overnight in a beautiful mixture of rosemary, garlic, and a little bit of lemon. And I have now just fixed up the other 2, test subjects, and they are now marinating in the exact same mix. And the reason for that is I absolutely hate wasting time, and I hate wasting money. So if you feel the same way and you've been trying to lose weight and you haven't had much luck, or perhaps you know someone who has, please message me. I would love to find some way to help you or your loved one's dreams become a reality. Thank you very much for watching.